The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
Welcome to True Crime Stories Hub. In today's true crime documentary, we uncover the shocking story of Sarah Reynolds, who faced a devastating betrayal by her husband, John, when he had an affair with her best friend, Rachel Miller. What started as a betrayal ended in murder, tearing apart a family and a community. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more gripping true crime stories. Only here on True Crime Stories Hub. The Reynolds family was living the ideal family life in September 2011. Many people were envious of the life that John and Sarah Reynolds had created together. With a well-kept yard and a warm and inviting ambience, their house was located in a posh Dallas neighborhood. Both of their children excelled academically and were involved in the community. Known for her friendliness, Sarah was always willing to help out or plan events for the community. Rachel Miller, her closest friend, was like a member of the family. Since their college reunion, the two women's friendship has only gotten closer. They shared everything, from daily pleasures to intimate secrets, and they were inseparable. The leaves started to change to gold and amber hues as autumn descended, marking the passing of the seasons. However, a storm was building beneath the Reynolds' apparently idyllic existence. John, a real estate agent who had always been committed to his job, started to feel the pressure of his duties. He was feeling the effects of the long hours away from home and the growing pressure. Even when John was physically present, Sarah saw that he appeared more aloof, his thoughts frequently elsewhere. Never realizing that something far more serious was bothering him, she attempted to be sympathetic and blamed it on the stress of his work. By October 2011, it was clear that John needed to get away. With every day that went by, he noticed that his relationship with Sarah was deteriorating. This was the period when he started to see Rachel differently. She was always available, sympathetic, and approachable. Conversations over coffee or late-night beverages that began innocently soon turned into something more. John found relief from the tension he was experiencing at home in Rachel's companionship. Their seemingly innocuous meetings quickly acquired a new significance. Under the guise of friendship, they started spending more time together. However, they were both aware of their unconscious attraction to one another. The affair between John and Rachel grew more intense as November 2011 drew near. They grew bolder and met in locations they believed to be secure from prying eyes. John would go to Rachel's residence pretending to catch up or talk about local happenings. In order to be alone and escape the limitations of their daily existence, they would occasionally flee to a neighboring hotel. They even took chances by getting together at the Reynolds house when Sarah was out attending social events or running errands. Sarah was blissfully oblivious to what was taking place in front of her. She never suspected the deception that was taking place because she had complete faith in both her husband and her best friend. Having always been self-sufficient and happy with her life, Rachel started to regard John as more than a passing fancy. She had become possessive of him by December 2011 and wanted more than just moments that were taken from him. Subtly, she began to indicate that John ought to leave Sarah and be with her. But John was divided. His love for Rachel was overwhelming, but he still cared about Sarah and didn't want to hurt her. The affair started to cause him mental turmoil all the time. Although he realized that going down this path could result in disaster, he was unable to resist Rachel's charm. The strain in John and Sarah's marriage became increasingly noticeable as the new year drew near. Sarah was unable to ignore John's alterations by January 2012. Even when spending time with the kids or at family dinners, he was frequently preoccupied, his thoughts appearing to be elsewhere. He started coming up with reasons to leave the house early or remain out late. Sarah had a gut feeling that something wasn't right. She saw the little things, like John's tendency to avoid eye contact, his hasty concealment of his phone when she walked in, and his apparent lack of interest in their discussions. Unaware that Rachel was the root of her problems, Sarah sought assistance from Rachel because she was worried about the status of her marriage. Comforting Sarah and urging her to have patience with John, Rachel did a good job in her role. She suggested that Sarah allow John time to realize how stressed he was. Unaware that Rachel was carrying on the affair behind her back, Sarah obeyed her advice since she had complete faith in her. By February 2012, Sarah began to suspect something. John's behavior began to change in more subtle ways. When she inquired about his whereabouts, he became defensive and more reclusive, answering calls in a separate room. He appeared less interested in their relationship, and his inexplicable absences increased in frequency. Sarah, who had always been sure of her marriage, started to feel apprehensive. She pondered whether John was keeping something from her, but she was unable to face him head-on. Rachel made an effort to keep her distance from the couple since she thought Sarah could be catching on. She made excuses to avoid answering Sarah's calls and reduced the frequency of her visits. But John was unable to let go since his reliance on her had increased. Rachel tried to distance themselves from their affair, but they were unable to escape the web of falsehoods they had spun. Unspoken conflicts and secrets threatened to destroy all Sarah and Rachel had accumulated over the years, causing their once strong friendship to erode. There was a quiet storm simmering beneath the surface of the Reynolds home, and the tension was evident. A sad and irrevocable chain of events was set in motion by Sarah's mounting suspicions and John's increasing deceit. None of them could predict the terrible outcomes that would follow, and the ideal existence they had worked so hard to preserve was about to fall apart. Sarah Reynolds woke up to what she assumed would be a typical day on the morning of March 1, 2012. She made breakfast for her kids, said the customary hellos to her husband John, and carried on with her day. John's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter before he left for work. Seeing that he had left it behind, Sarah picked it up and planned to deliver it to him later. However, another SMS notification sprang up on the screen before she could put it down. The name of the sender, Rachel Miller, made her heart skip a beat. For months, mistrust and curiosity had been eating away at Sarah, forcing her to unlock John's phone. Her world was destroyed by what she discovered. Over the course of several months, a series of private messages between John and Rachel developed in front of her. Every communication served as a bitter reminder of the betrayed trust. There was no uncertainty regarding the nature of their relationship because the statements were so plain. Each exchange was more damning than the last, and Sarah's hands shook as she read them. It was devastating to learn that her husband, whom she had trusted and loved for so long, had cheated on her with her best friend. In addition to damaging her marriage, the betrayal left her with a deep pain from someone she had thought of as a sister. As the realization weighed heavily on her, the room felt as though it were closing in on her. Sarah was suffering from the shock of her world being turned upside down in an instant. When John got home later that day, Sarah presented him with the proof. He did not refute it. After the affair was made public, John insisted that it was over out of a mixture of desperation and guilt. "I made a terrible mistake," he said, pleading for pardon. But it was too late for Sarah. John's comments did little to ease the anguish. There was no room for compromise when she insisted that he immediately stop communicating with Rachel. For Sarah, the days that followed were a blur. The immediate shock had worn off by March 3, 2012, and a profound sense of perplexity and betrayal had replaced it. She confided in another close friend since she couldn't handle the emotional anguish on her alone. Furious for Sarah, this friend advised her to leave John, stating that no marriage could withstand such a betrayal. However, Sarah wasn't prepared to make such a significant choice because she was still dealing with the loss of her friendship with Rachel as well as her husband's faithfulness. She held on to the dream that their marriage may be saved, that maybe the scars would eventually go away. Despite the severe wounds caused by the betrayal, she made the difficult choice to stay and attempt to mend things. The first thing Sarah did was to cut Rachel out of her life entirely. She stopped returning her calls, removed her from social media, and stayed away from potential meeting spots. Sarah saw this as an essential act of self-defense, a means of shielding herself from more suffering. The situation became more tense as the days went by. Feeling abandoned and desperate, Rachel made the decision to speak with John face-to-face on March 6, 2012. She barely controlled her emotions when she unexpectedly showed up at his office. She had reached her breaking point after being rejected by both Sarah and John, and she was resolved to find out why. Believing that they were meant to be together, Rachel begged John to leave Sarah and begin a new life with her. However, John made it apparent that their relationship was a mistake after becoming overburdened by the circumstances at home and Sarah's demand to cut off all communication with Rachel. He informed Rachel that she needed to move on and that he was determined to mend his marriage. Rachel was enraged. After everything they had shared, the man she had risked everything for was suddenly rejecting her and picking his wife over her. Rachel was greatly hurt by the rejection, and her rage started to fester. With thoughts of retaliation racing through her head, she vowed to hold John accountable for humiliating her and left his office. Rachel's behavior became more unpredictable during the course of the following 2 days. She started following John and Sarah everywhere they went on March 8, 2012. As her rage boiled over into obsession, she would park her automobile next to their house and observe from a distance. She was so angry and desperate that she sent John a string of threatening messages. When John saw that things were getting out of hand, he made an effort to hide Rachel's behavior from Sarah. He didn't want to increase her anxiety or the hostility in their house. However, the strain was starting to manifest. Sensitive to John's shifts in attitude, Sarah felt that something was wrong. She observed that he appeared preoccupied and nervous, and that he would look over his shoulder more frequently. Unspoken anxieties and unsolved tension filled their home, creating an intolerable atmosphere. The terrible culmination of the scenario occurred on the evening of March 12, 2012. Although the day had gone smoothly, Rachel's fixation took a risky turn as night fell. She drove to the Reynolds house in the dark since she could no longer suppress her feelings. The neighborhood was peaceful, the most of the houses were dark, and the residents were asleep. It was late. After parking her car a short distance away, Rachel headed in the direction of the house. Her heart was thumping with a mixture of hurt, fury, and desperation, and her mind was racing. Even she might not have realized the seriousness of her intentions at that moment, but she had a knife with her, hidden in her purse. Rachel knocked on the door when she arrived at the Reynolds residence. She was determined to face John one final time. John experienced a surge of fear at hearing the knock. He was aware of who it was and the potential consequences of the encounter. He walked out silently, shutting the door behind him so as not to wake Sarah. In an attempt to avoid alerting Sarah or the neighbors, he spoke quietly as he confronted Rachel on the front lawn. The discussion swiftly turned into a dispute. Enraged and heartbroken, Rachel accused John of taking advantage of her and discarding her. John, finding it difficult to remain cool, attempted to soothe her, but things got out of hand. Rachel retrieved the knife from her purse in a moment of unrestrained rage. The altercation quickly descended into violence. Emotionally overwhelmed, Rachel stabbed John in the chest. Blood started to pool beneath John as he fell to the grass, holding his chest. Rachel stood motionless for a time, her mind unable to comprehend the horror in front of her as she finally realized the extent of what she had done. She left the scene in a panic, leaving John to perish by alone on his front yard. Sarah woke up early on March 13, 2012, with an odd sense of dread. Even though the home was strangely quiet, something felt off. When she got out of bed, she saw that John was no longer by her side. She hurried downstairs, worried, and called his name, but no one answered. She didn't notice him until she opened the front door. John's clothes were covered in blood, and his lifeless body was lying on the grass. There was too much to take in. As Sarah hurriedly dialed 911, her screams reverberated throughout the peaceful neighborhood. When the police swiftly came, they treated the scene as a homicide right away. Later that morning, the case was turned over to Detective Karen Alvarez. She could see when she got to the site that this was no isolated violent incident. The sight of the injuries and the manner in which the crime had been committed suggested that the perpetrator had a personal agenda. Sarah was in a state of shock when Detective Alvarez interviewed her to start her inquiry. Still reeling from the events of the previous few hours, Sarah told the investigator about John and Rachel's affair. Her thoughts kept going back to Rachel, and she maintained that she didn't know who else might want to kill John. Detective Alvarez focused on Rachel Miller on March 15, 2012. The main suspect was Rachel. Rachel denied having anything to do with John's death when questioned. Despite her flimsy alibi, she claimed to have been home alone the night of the murder. Detective Alvarez had concerns about her conduct during the interrogation as well. When the investigator probed Rachel on specifics, she avoided eye contact, gave erratic replies, and was clearly nervous. As the authorities gathered evidence to support their case, the investigation went on. By March 18, 2012, Rachel was facing mounting forensic evidence. When a knife with John's blood was discovered in a dumpster close to Rachel's house, it was a significant discovery. Rachel was directly linked to the crime when the knife was found to be the same one that had been used in the murder. Surveillance footage from a neighboring security camera provided additional proof. Rachel was further implicated in John's death by the video, which showed her automobile leaving the area of the Reynolds residence around the time of the murder. When police showed up at Rachel Miller's house on March 20, 2012, to arrest her for John Reynolds' murder, the quiet of the Dallas suburb was upended. As the woman they had known for years was carried away in handcuffs, the neighbors stared in shock. Once the life of every neighborhood get-together, Rachel now had to deal with a totally different reality. The amiable, vivacious woman, who had been a constant in many people's lives, was suddenly charged with a horrible crime. The harsh facts of the case were difficult for the community to reconcile with the Rachel they knew. The scandal was discussed in whispers as people tried to figure out how this tragedy had happened right in front of them. The story became the focus of unending conjecture as the news swiftly circulated. The idea that someone like Rachel, who had always seemed so alive and vivacious, could be capable of such brutality was difficult for many to accept. Rachel's trial started in April 2012, garnering considerably more attention. Every day, reporters, neighbors, and interested bystanders crowded the courtroom, all anxious to see the drama play out. The prosecution made a strong case, painstakingly outlining the circumstances surrounding John Reynolds' demise. They contended that rejection and jealousy had motivated Rachel, feelings that had smoldered for a while before erupting into fury on that fateful night. The prosecution presented a picture of a lady who had lost all sense of reason because of her preoccupation with John. There was a ton of evidence against Rachel. The knife with John's blood, discovered close to her residence, was produced by the prosecution as an essential piece of evidence. The security footage of Rachel's vehicle close to the Reynolds residence on the night of the murder was shown to the jury. They also disclosed the string of menacing communications Rachel had exchanged with John in the days preceding his demise. Every piece of evidence tightened Rachel's noose, acting as another nail in the coffin. The defense attempted to paint Rachel as a victim in a last-ditch effort to save her. They maintained that she had been duped by John, who had played with her feelings and made her think they would be together in the future. According to the defense, Rachel's acts were those of a woman who had been used and abandoned by a guy, pushing her to the limit. In an effort to present Rachel in a more positive light, they tried to arouse the jury's sympathies. But it was hard for the defense to make any headway because of the strength of the evidence. Following days of rigorous deliberation, the jury eventually returned a decision on April 25, 2012. The jury foreman stood to announce the verdict, and the courtroom fell silent. Rachel's conviction for second-degree murder was upheld. 25 years in prison with the prospect of release after 15 years was the sentence. For some, the verdict provided closure, but for others, it just made the community's already heavy sadness worse. Rachel remained silent in shock after hearing the decision. She gradually came to terms with the fact that she would be incarcerated for the next 25 years of her life. The lively woman who had been the life of the party when she was released from the courtroom was now a shell of her former self. It was impossible to avoid the truth of what she had done and the ensuing fallout. The Reynolds family home, which had once been a sanctuary of love and joy, turned into a place of intolerable memories for Sarah in the weeks that followed. The house now served as a continual reminder of what she had lost, with its well-known rooms and treasured possessions. Her husband's treachery, his untimely death, and her closest friend's dishonesty were scars that would not go away. Sarah had to make the tough choice to sell the house by May 2012. In an attempt to find some measure of peace and a chance to start over somewhere where the ghosts of the past wouldn't haunt her every day, she packed up her life and relocated with her kids. The community also found it difficult to move on. The tragedy that had occurred had now shattered the previously vibrant neighborhood, where everyone knew one another by name and enjoyed one another's happiness. Now there was a hint of regret and grief in the formerly innocent murmurs of gossip. Everyone whispered about Rachel. The lively events that used to unite the neighborhood felt different now. A sobering reminder of how swiftly life may change permeated them. For Rachel, the freedom and independence she had previously experienced were in sharp contrast to her new life behind bars. In 2013, with a glimmer of optimism that her life might yet turn out differently, she appealed, asking for a sentence reduction. However, the appeal was turned down. Rachel was forced to accept the consequences of her sentence after the courts upheld the initial verdict. Rachel had plenty of time in the solitude of her cell to consider the decisions that had brought her to such a terrible place. Her once all-consuming passion had become an obsession that ultimately ended up ruining both her and John's lives. Her former life, which had been full of friends, get-togethers, and a feeling of community, was now only a faint recollection. She was constrained by prison bars, which were both a physical reality and a jail she had created for herself. How desperate could this lady have been to kill the person she claimed to love? That is the question that keeps coming up. To be honest, it is depressing. Furthermore, we have witnessed other instances of desperation. Another tragic tale of desperation is the housewife's covert affair with Plummer, which culminates in murder. Remember to like, subscribe, and watch that case as well as others on our channel.
The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
A big duffel bag was found abandoned on the lonely section of Highway 12 in rural Greene County on October 17, 2015. An old man contacted 911 because he thought the bag was strange. They tried, but were unable, to move the extremely heavy bag as the responding officer arrived. After deciding to look into it more, they opened the bag and discovered something that would follow them around for the rest of their lives. The Smith-Jones family, a blended family with an apparently ideal facade, was at the heart of this catastrophe. On November 12, 1982, John Smith Oliver, a prosperous businessman in his late 40s, was born in Jacksonville, Florida. John was brought up with strong morals and a strong work ethic because he came from a middle-class family. He was instilled with a sense of duty and ambition by his parents, who were both high school sweethearts, a quality that would help him in his future undertakings was the calm resolve that characterized John's early years. John became known as a rising star in his chosen area as he grew older because of his charisma and innate leadership skills. 6 years ago, he wed Emily Jones, a lovely and endearing woman in her mid-30s. They and their offspring from past marriages had become a close-knit family. John Smith and Natasha Smith, his former spouse. Their tale started in 1990, more than 20 years ago, when they were both young and driven individuals pursuing their goals in the vibrant city of New York. John, a rising star in the banking industry, was presenting on investment ideas at a networking event when they first met. A clever marketing professional named Natasha was in the audience and was struck by John's charm and confidence right away. When they started talking after the presentation, John was captivated by Natasha's beauty, intelligence, and inventiveness. After exchanging phone numbers, they met for dinner at a hip Manhattan restaurant for their first date. There was no denying their chemistry, and they soon found that they had similar interests in business, art, and travel. They encouraged one another's goals and careers as their relationship grew. John's financial business flourished because to Natasha's marketing skills, which helped him attract well-known customers. In the meantime, Natasha's marketing company was thriving, and she was able to grow it thanks to John's financial advice. Together, they created a commercial empire, with Natasha's marketing firm taking home multiple accolades and John's company emerging as a major force in the banking sector. Peers looked up to them and revered them. They were New York City's golden pair. Their private lives were just as prosperous. In front of friends, family, and business acquaintances, they were married in a grand ceremony at a posh Hamptons house. Their entire world revolved around their gorgeous baby, Parker, but over time, their seemingly ideal relationship started to show signs of weakness. Their marriage suffered as a result of John's long hours and frequent travel, and Natasha began to feel more and more abandoned. She gave her everything to her career, yet they became more and more separated. The gap between them widened in spite of their attempts to patch things up. Their interactions became difficult, and they started to dispute more often. Their friends and relatives noticed the difference and could see the tension between them. They got into a heated dispute in front of their friends and co-workers at a charity banquet one fateful evening. Natasha stormed out of the event after the argument, leaving John ashamed and alone. John's discovery that Natasha was having an affair with a younger man, a gifted artist she had met at a gallery opening, was the last straw. John was saddened by the revelation and came to the conclusion that their marriage could not be saved. They fought bitterly over Parker's custody during their ugly and well-publicized divorce. They ultimately agreed to share custody, but the harm had already been done. Antagonism and heartache had marked the end of their once adoring romance. The parts were left for John to pick up. His career and personal life are in ruins. He immersed himself in his work, using it as a way to escape the hurt of his broken marriage. However, the scars from his divorce remained with him for years after it was over. Natasha's health severely deteriorated shortly after their 2006 divorce. She had been concealing a terrible secret. She was found to have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, which had rapidly spread throughout her body. She fought valiantly, but on the second day of March 2007, a year after their divorce, she passed away from the illness. Despite their turbulent ending, her death shocked and devastated John. Her passing evoked a range of feelings he believed he had long suppressed, yet he had never stopped loving her. He witnessed the effects of her death on his son Parker, who was having a hard time dealing with his mother's death when he went to her funeral. John met Emily Jones, a sweet and lovely person who was a friend of a friend, in 2008 while he was working through his grief. Her husband had died in a terrible accident only a few years earlier, leaving her a widow herself. John found himself pulled to her warmth and compassion as they bonded over their common experiences of heartbreak and loss. John was first hesitant to be married again, but he ended himself falling in love with Emily. He was thankful that she was in his life because she restored happiness and light. In 2009, they were joined by close friends and family in a private ceremony. Parker, John's 22-year-old son, had always been close to his father and was a lively and gregarious young man. Avery, Emily's 25-year-old daughter, was a beautiful and lively young lady who had immediately taken center stage in the family. The Smith-Jones family seemed to be a caring and encouraging group to strangers. When Avery's lifeless body was found packed inside a huge duffel bag and dumped along the lonely stretch of Highway 12 in rural Greene County on October 18, 2015, everything changed for the Smith-Jones family. The family's flawless facade started to fall apart after the horrifying discovery rocked the little town. When authorities examined the crime scene, they discovered that Avery had suffered considerable pain and struggle, as evidenced by the terrible mutilation of her corpse. Once nimble and full of life and promise, the young woman had met a terrible end. The family was devastated and perplexed by the news of Avery's murder. 2 days earlier, Avery said she was leaving the house to spend time with her boyfriend Adrian and would return the following week. Detective Matthews was immediately placed in charge of the case after the horrific discovery of Avery's body. The Smiths were questioned by the police in their house on October 19th. Parker was the first individual interviewed. Parker opened out to the police about his relationship with Avery, and they listened carefully. Parker responded that he had never felt close to his stepsister, and that it wasn't because of anything Avery had done when asked if he and his stepsister had a close relationship. Instead, it was because, following the death of his mother, he had found it difficult to accept his father's decision to get married again. He had offered the concept of another woman replacing his mother because he felt a sense of loyalty to her memory. John, who was at home alone with Parker, while Emily was gone on business, was questioned by the police. According to John, Avery kept to herself and didn't share anything with anyone, not even her mother. In contrast to Parker's earlier claim, he eventually disclosed that Avery was close to his son. John said they had a close bond and were quite fond of one another, much like siblings. He saw that Parker appeared to be the family member who knew the most about Avery's life. John gave an alibi when questioned about his whereabouts on the day Avery left home, claiming to have been at work starting at 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. He made reference to a midday meeting with co-workers, which would support his alibi. After conducting an investigation, the police discovered discrepancies between John's and Parker's claims, particularly how they described Avery and Parker's relationship. John's alibi was verified by his co-workers, but the inconsistencies in the family member's testimony prompted more inquiries from the police. After conducting an autopsy on Avery's dismembered body on October 21st, 2015, the forensic team gave the police a summary of their findings. Before she was dismembered, they learned that she had been smothered to death. The murder weapon was thought to have been a large knife, most likely a butcher knife, based on the cuts found on the body. They looked through the deceased's files. They called the Smiths to give their statements at the station, as they couldn't find any crucial clue that would help them find the murderer. They received a summons on the 22nd. Before she left, John was asked when he had last seen or spoken to Avery. After giving it some thought, John said that he recalled arriving home early on the 16th at around 2 or 3 p.m. to get something he had forgotten. From Parker's chamber, he had believed he heard Avery's voice. He added that no one answered when he knocked on the door. The door was locked, and he didn't give it much thought, because he thought everyone was out when he knocked and got no answer. As he spoke, the cops recorded his statement. John then showed them the text message he received from her announcing her visit to Adrian. When they inquired about his identity, John revealed that he was Avery's lover. She had never texted him about such things, or her previous adventures with him, he continued, so he thought it was odd. Following a questioning of Parker, the police received a new lead and quickly learned his residence. Adrian Gareth was taken into custody and interrogated. When they questioned him about why he killed Avery, he denied it since he didn't want to kill someone he had once loved. He went on to say that he hadn't seen her in 2 months since they had broken up. A week before, to the murder, they examined his activities, and they also examined the alibi he gave regarding his activities on the 16th, the day the victim left home. He was released once they verified it. The police had now returned to the start. No lead was found. They followed the deceased's phone number, which her stepfather had given them, but they were unsuccessful since they discovered it in a trash pile close to the body. After reviewing the case file once more and verifying the statements they had received, they turned their attention to John's son, Parker. Although he claimed to be distant from the victim, he appeared to know more about her than her stepfather and even her boyfriend's personal information. On October 23rd, 2 police officers paid a visit to the Smith-Jones home the following day. On one occasion, Parker was called into the living room and asked where he had been the day the dead went home. Parker said that day he was at a friend's house. They asked Parker what he was doing between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. that day. He paused before responding, and they saw it. He replied that he had been sleeping at home. He was suspected of lying by the police. They looked through the book, which had his father's written declaration that no one had answered when he knocked on Parker's door. They started to go further. Parker responded to their inquiries. By getting in touch with the people Parker had given as references, the police made the decision to look into his alibi in detail. But when they contacted these connections, they discovered something unexpected. They were all unable to verify that Parker was present on that particular day. Contrary to what he had previously said, they all denied ever seeing Parker on that particular day. Suspicions were aroused by this fresh information. Thus, the police chose to further investigate. In an attempt to obtain additional evidence, they asked to view the CCTV footage from cameras near the Smiths' home. They got the video, watched it closely, and discovered something important. Around 7 p.m., Parker drove his father's car out of the compound, according to the CCTV footage. On October 16th, a significant detail that ran counter to what he had previously said. The police started looking into Parker more when this fresh evidence raised the possibility that he was connected to Avery's disappearance. Serious doubts were raised regarding his involvement because he had been spotted leaving the compound around the time Avery vanished and had used his father's automobile. The police were committed to solving the case and learning the real reason for Avery's disappearance. They immediately asked for a warrant to search Smith-Jones's house, and on October 24th, they did just that. They were shocked by what they discovered when they checked Parker's room. The hue of the duffel bag in which Avery was discovered was the same as several others. They looked in the drawer of his dresser. They discovered a butchering knife and a pair of gloves. The knife was stained with blood. He had undoubtedly used the same one to dismember the dead. Parker, who had been observing the entire time, was arrested on October 24th after sufficient evidence was discovered. Despite his denials, the cops pulled him into their van and sent him to the district for further investigation. The pillow he used to suffocate the girl contained her DNA, and the forensics team discovered bloodstains in his chamber. Other items discovered in the room indicated that the two step-siblings were intimate and close. Parker was unable to reject the evidence when the police presented it to him, so he broke down in tears and admitted to his crime. He hadn't killed Avery on purpose, despite what the police would believe. To be honest, he had come to love her. Their relationship had begun innocently enough, with a brief moment of solace that had developed into more. He claimed that following a heated disagreement with her partner on the phone, Avery was sobbing and trembling when they initially undressed. He had gone to console her, as he had been the only person present. Somehow, their mutual attraction had taken control, and they had found themselves sharing a bed. He went on to say that he had been lured to Avery's vulnerability since she had been exposed. Before he knew it, they were sharing a kiss after he had hugged her close and felt her warm tears on his skin. Even though it was a soft, loving moment, it had ignited something deeper inside of them. He went on to say that he had experienced a mixture of exhilaration and shame as they had undressed one another. After all, their parents would never approve of them because they were step-siblings. However, they were powerless to stop themselves. Their bodies were aching for each other's touch, and they had been attracted to one another like magnets. It had been passionate but uneasy the first time. They had experimented with one another's bodies, finding new cravings and pleasures. Parker had felt alive, as though he had at last discovered a person who could relate to him. They had been inseparable since that time. During family get-togethers, their hands would touch beneath the table as they stole glances at one another. They would sneak around, looking for opportunities to make love, kiss, and spend time alone. It was the first time Parker had ever felt that way about someone. The only reason he had lied to the police was to keep their secret safe. He had no intention of killing Avery, and he had no intention of hurting her either. He talked about what had happened that fateful day. He had been reluctant at first, but Avery had persuaded him to resume their romance when she had come to his room. He had been both excited and afraid as they started to undress, knowing that they might be caught at any time. His heart was pounding when the knock on the door finally arrived. He had been terrified that his stepmother or father had found them. In an instant, he had made a choice that would follow him for the rest of his life. In an attempt to drown out Avery's voice, which was starting to rise in panic, he had covered her face with the pillow. Instead of calming her down as he had hoped, it had the opposite effect. Parker had been too preoccupied with his own panic to see that Avery had fought beneath him, her body tensing up in fright. He hadn't noticed that Avery had stopped moving since he had been immobilized, his mind spinning with ideas of getting caught. He didn't notice her dead eyes staring back at him until he had lifted the pillow, assuming everything was fine. He hadn't been able to process what had happened and had been in shock. It was too late when he attempted to resuscitate her. Avery had left. Then, in the room, he had attempted to stuff her into one of his duffel bags, but her body was too big. He performed the unimaginable while trembling. He divided her body pieces with the butchering knife in the kitchen, then carefully packed them into his suitcase. After that, he took off in his father's other vehicle and abandoned the bag on a lonely section of Highway 12. The police discovered that Parker's affair had devolved from a moment of pleasure to ruin following the confession. While they kept Mrs. Emily, whom they had contacted to tell her on her vacation the day before about the killing of her daughter, the police let Mr. John see his son behind bars. They prevented her from taunting her spouse with her heels and holding him. Before departing on her journey, she had seen her daughter healthy, but upon seeing her horrifying body, she had collapsed. John had warned the police that he would bring his attorneys to rescue his son during the disturbance, arguing that his son was innocent and that he had been forced to confess to the murder. As word of the Smith-Jones incident spread like wildfire, numerous articles denouncing the boy's behavior were written. Some publications said that the youngster had done it accidentally and that he would only receive a little punishment. But because it was such a delicate subject, the articles were flooded and eventually removed. Many watched the story to find out what would happen to Parker. Parker appeared in court on November 1st for his offenses. He received a life sentence after being proven guilty. John, Parker's father, became enraged and yelled at the court. The penalty didn't seem fair to him. John was removed from the courtroom by the security personnel. Avery's mother, Emily, wept a lot and was quite depressed. She continued to mourn her daughter. Everyone was angry and passionate, and the courtroom was in disarray. Many people had suffered greatly as a result of Parker's activities. Even though he didn't kill his stepsister on purpose, should he still be punished severely for his crime? While some felt that a lighter sentence would be more appropriate, others maintained that his careless acts still called for a harsh punishment. Despite his son's terrible behavior toward Emily's child, was John still able to live with her?
The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
A story of tragedy and treachery played out in the sleepy village of Ridgewood, permanently changing the lives of those involved. Eliza and Veronica Matthews, two sisters, were at the center of this tale. Adam Harper, a prominent and accomplished surgeon, was the spouse of Veronica, the older of the two. Everyone admired their seemingly ideal life, but a terrible and dark drama was simmering beneath the surface. In Ridgewood, Eliza and Veronica were born into a humble household. Their mother worked as a nurse and their father was a mechanic. It was evident from an early age that the two sisters were very different from one another. Veronica was her parents' favorite because of her cool head and academic prowess. Like her mother, she did well in school, pursued a career in medicine, and finally became a doctor. Her life took an expected but noble course, culminating in her marriage to Adam Harper, a man who shared her achievement and ambition. In contrast, Eliza was a wild soul. She was disturbed and intelligent, and she had a hard time fitting in. Her relationships were as turbulent as her job choices, and she frequently got into trouble for her rebellious personality. She never settled down, moving from city to city and job to job. She frequently utilized her charm and slyness to obtain what she desired, demonstrating her manipulative tendencies at a young age. As a child, the sisters' differences were striking. The epitome of a good girl, Veronica was industrious, courteous, and ever willing to please. She was praised by professors and admired by students for her academic and social prowess. But Eliza was the reverse. She frequently questioned authority and pushed limits since she was restless and rebellious. She was just as smart as Veronica, but she lacked Veronica's innate focus and discipline. Proud with Veronica's achievements and character, their parents, John and Margaret Matthews, showered her with affection. Feeling ignored and misinterpreted, Eliza acted out in a variety of ways, looking for approval and attention in the wrong places. The sisters developed a rift as a result of this dynamic, which only got worse as they grew older. Veronica's path was clear-cut and expected. She attended college after high school and graduated with a degree in medicine. While residing there, she got to know Adam Harper. Adam, a budding medical professional, fell in love with Veronica's brilliance and attractiveness right away. Their quick and apparently ideal courtship ended in a wedding that made Ridgewood speak. With a bright and promising future, the couple settled into a comfortable life. But Eliza's journey was anything but simple. She started a string of disastrous ventures shortly after graduating from high school. She tried her hand at everything from real estate to bartending, but nothing seemed to stick. Her relationships were equally erratic, marked by bitter endings and strong passions. Even while she exuded confidence, Eliza was beginning to feel inadequate, particularly when compared to her sister, who seemed flawless. After yet another failed romance and growing debt, Eliza returned to Ridgewood. She was emotionally and financially spent after her most recent romantic involvement ended badly. She went to the only family she had left for safety. Ever the obedient sister, Veronica greeted Eliza's return with open arms. Veronica loved her sister and was prepared to assist her in getting back on her feet, even though they didn't agree. In an apparent attempt to find employment and start over, Eliza moved into the guest home on Veronica and Adam's property. But Eliza had other ideas. She was searching for an opportunity, not just a new beginning. She secretly resented her sister's success since Veronica's ideal life served as a stark reminder of what she lacked. When Eliza arrived, Veronica and Adam's marriage was going through a difficult time. Adam was a committed and diligent surgeon who was frequently distracted by his tough profession. There wasn't much time for intimacy or deep connection with Veronica because of the long hours and ongoing stress. Even though their lives appeared to be flawless, Eliza was quick to spot and take advantage of the flaws in their relationship. It began rather casually. Eliza would eat dinner with Veronica and Adam, laughing and telling stories. Adam was attracted to Eliza's lively and erratic nature after first being uninterested in her. She was impulsive, bold, and alluring, everything that Veronica was not. Eliza started making up reasons to spend time with Adam. She would touch his arm during chats, ask him for advice on unimportant topics, and give him a lot of compliments on his work. Eliza's attention delighted Adam, who was feeling the strain of his hard career and the boredom of his marriage. Eliza invited Adam to a private area of the garden one evening to drink a bottle of wine while Veronica was working late. She started to gently flirt with him under the pretense of sibling bonding. After the wine helped them speak more freely, their talk became more personal. In contrast to Veronica, Eliza was able to make Adam feel recognized and valued by playing on his fears and unmet wants. There was a tangible chemistry between them, an electric current that neither of them could ignore. Despite his initial reluctance, Adam found himself pulled to Eliza more and more. In sharp contrast to the mundane predictability of his life with Veronica, her presence was a welcome change. Eliza, on the other hand, was methodical in her strategy, adjusting her attempts to keep Adam on edge and constantly wanting more. But she was never entirely certain how far she would push him. An innocent flirtation swiftly turned into a serious relationship. Adam found himself sneaking around to be with Eliza since he couldn't help but be drawn to her. Their private encounter was a passionate and guilty time. Eliza saw the affair as a game, a means of surpassing her sister at last. Adam saw it as a way to escape his everyday existence and a way to reignite a passion he had long since given up. After first being unaware of the affair, Veronica started to observe changes in Adam. He was more aloof and frequently used excuses to go business trips or remain late at work. As her suspicions increased, she began to piece the truth together. The lingering glances between Adam and Eliza, the late-night phone conversations, and the abrupt aloofness in her marriage all suggested an unimaginable betrayal. Eliza's machinations grew increasingly obvious as the affair went on. She would pretend to be vulnerable, appealing to Adam's protective nature, and then transform into an intense seductress, keeping him captivated and off balance all the time. Adam was caught in a web of lies divided between his desire for Eliza and his love for Veronica. The excitement of their forbidden affair filled Eliza with joy. Her sense of victory over Veronica grew with each covert rendezvous. She made sure they wouldn't be found by carefully organizing their meeting. They would get together in different places, such remote parks or motels outside of town. Their interactions were all the more thrilling because of the risk of being discovered. Adam, meantime, was enmeshed in a tornado of feelings. The guilt was oppressive, but the affair was thrilling. Although he detested himself for betraying Veronica, he was unable to avoid Eliza. She had turned into a dark, alluring power that engulfed him, an addiction. His behavior, which wavered between extreme devotion for Veronica and unexplained coldness, was a clear indication of his internal conflict. Veronica had keen intuition, and she was aware of Adam's alterations. She shared her worries and concerns with Julia, her best friend. Concerned and encouraging, Julia encouraged Veronica to speak with Adam face to face. But Veronica chose to watch a little longer before accusing anyone, believing it was all a misunderstanding. One stormy evening, Veronica's suspicions came to a head. She went up to Adam and insisted on knowing the truth. Adam admitted to the affair because he could no longer lie. Veronica was devastated by the realization. The two people she loved the most broke her trust, and her ideal existence was a lie. Feeling angry and heartbroken, Veronica went up to Eliza. There were many accusations and sour comments throughout the heated dispute. After a period of defiance, Eliza finally expressed her actual emotions. With a calculating, icy sneer, she confessed to the affair, relishing the suffering she had inflicted. Overwhelmed by a flurry of feelings, Veronica ran out of the home, her head a jumble of sadness and betrayal, her pulse racing. Memories of better days, now marred by the heartbreaking discovery of her husband's adultery, were scattered throughout her house. The rain matched her emotions as she snatched up her car keys and dashed out into the wild night. As though the skies themselves were lamenting her suffering, the sky rumbled menacingly. As the windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the heavy precipitation, she drove blindly through the storm. Her mind was a raging sea of anger and grief, with each wave slamming more forcefully than the last. The man she trusted and loved betrayed her, twisting it like a knife in her heart. The car's engine roared in the night as she pushed her foot harder on the throttle pedal in an attempt to outrun the pain. The rain-slicked asphalt becoming dangerous as she raced through the twisting roads outside Ridgewood. She was too distracted to notice the tires fight for traction. The back end of the automobile fishtailed when she rounded a hairpin bend too fast. Although Veronica struggled for dominance, it was too late. The car veered off the road, crashing down the rocky gully and over the thin railing. The terrible events of the evening were tragically punctuated by the crash's reverberating sound throughout the night. Veronica's body was discovered dead the following morning, as the first rays of dawn peeled through the fading storm clouds. At the base of the gully, her car was a twisted mess. The broken glass and crumpled metal served as a sobering reminder of how violently her desperate escape ended. In the close-knit town of Ridgewood, where everyone knew one another, word of the disaster circulated swiftly. One could feel the shock, a wave of incredulity and grief sweeping over the community. When Adam heard the news, he was crushed. His grief and remorse were nearly too much for him to handle. The romance with Eliza had been a moment of weakness that went awry, and he had previously loved Veronica dearly. He had lost everything now. The disagreements, the pain in Veronica's eyes, and the last seconds before she rushed out were all replayed in his thoughts. The memory of his wife and the betrayal that resulted in her premature death tormented him, making him a shell of the person he once was. Eliza, however, experienced a perverted sense of triumph. Although she had been successful in her goal to ruin Veronica's ideal existence, the price was greater than she had expected. This was hardly the drama she had anticipated, maybe a split or a scandal. The response from the community was harsh and quick. She had gone from being admired to being mocked and shunned. She was followed everywhere by the murmurs, which eventually became intolerable to her. Her life was in ruins when she left Ridgewood, forever changed by the catastrophe she had assisted in planning. The task of looking into the accident fell to Detective Sarah Blake. She had a reputation for having excellent intuition and paying close attention to details. Something didn't set right with her as she looked over the facts and assessed the crash site. The circumstances were too convenient, and the crash appeared too intentional. Blake's interest was aroused, and she investigated Veronica's life further, learning about the affair and the turbulent circumstances surrounding her passing. Family and friend interviews revealed a somber picture. Betrayal had driven Veronica to her breaking point as a woman. Eliza's past partners characterized her as cunning and cruel, while Adam's co-workers talked about his recent emotional outbursts and unpredictable conduct. As the puzzle pieces came together, a tale of mental suffering and desperate deeds emerged. Although Veronica's death was officially declared an accident, Blake's investigation found that Eliza and Adam's emotional abuse was the primary cause of her passing. She had been driven to despair by the affair, and her desperate attempt to flee the excruciating suffering was reflected in her hurried drive through the storm. The court of public opinion was harsh, even if no criminal charges were brought. Adam and Eliza's reputations were permanently damaged when the reality of their affair spread like wildfire around Ridgewood. Eliza and Adam were left to deal with the fallout from their deeds. The ghost of Adam's wife and the guilt that tore at his heart made his existence an empty shell. Eliza, who was once a lively and self-assured woman, became a notorious character whose name was associated with tragedy and treachery. Ridgewood's heart will always be scarred by Veronica's death, which served as a sobering lesson to everyone who understood the real price of dishonesty. No detail was overlooked in Detective Sarah Blake's exhaustive inquiry. She painstakingly recreated Veronica's last hours piece by piece, making sure that every little aspect was carefully considered. The Rusty Anchor, a nearby tavern where Veronica had been spotted the night of the accident, was the destination of Blake's meticulous approach. Blake was keen to discover the secrets hidden within this dimly lit hideaway for the local working class. Hank, the bartender, turned out to be a crucial investigatory witness. He remembered well and poignantly Veronica's emotional state that night. "She was drinking a lot, more than I've ever seen," Hank said in a rough but worried voice. She appeared to be in great distress, as if she were attempting to numb her pain. According to Hank's story, the shocking discovery of her husband's affair drove the woman to the brink of despair. He explained how Veronica had withdrawn to a corner table, nursing a drink after another, as though attempting to dull an excruciating ache, her eyes red and puffy from sobbing. Important background information about Veronica's mental state was given by Hank's testimony. Detective Blake realized that the heartbreaking revelation of Adam's adultery had sent Veronica into a deep depression. Blake contacted Veronica's best friend Julia to learn more about Veronica's struggles. Veronica's concerns and the emotional damage they had caused were validated by Julia's story. Julia's voice was shaking as she admitted that she was distraught. Veronica was devastated by Adam's betrayal because she loved him so much. Veronica's descent into despair was described by Julia, who saw that her once vibrant companion had turned into a shadow of her former self. She was unable to eat or sleep. Every thought she had was consumed by the affair, Julia added, tears in her eyes. I made an effort to assist her, but she felt abandoned and deceived. Blake's focus then shifted to Adam and Eliza, the main players in the tragedy that was developing. Adam was interviewed first, a guy now consumed with remorse. He came across as a shattered person who was suffering because of what he had done. He made an honest and sincere confession. With tears in his eyes, he told Blake that he loved Veronica. "I had no desire to harm her. I had no idea what happened to me." Adam's words were filled with regret and sadness, and his remorse was evident. He talked about how much he loved Veronica, and how his careless actions had brought about such a disastrous conclusion. His hands shaking, he whispered, "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I wish I could go back and change everything." Eliza, however, was more difficult to break. She initially put on a front of innocence, claiming that she had no malicious purpose. Her defenses, however, started to give way under Blake's incisive and persistent interrogation. Eliza was eventually worn down by the detective's relentless perseverance and acute sense of deceit. Eliza said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I wanted what Veronica had. I felt vindicated if I could take Adam away from her because I was jealous." Eliza's revelation exposed a history of manipulative behavior and a deep-seated jealousy that had motivated her acts. She explained how she had meticulously planned her seduction of Adam, taking advantage of his frailties and the rifts in his marriage. When Blake looked into Eliza's past, he discovered a concerning trend of similar tendencies in earlier relationships. A picture of a lady who was enchanting and seductive but ultimately disastrous was presented by former lovers and acquaintances. She had a history of taking advantage of others to achieve her goals and ruthlessly dumping them when they were no longer useful. She is a black widow who lures men into her web of deceit and leaves them with their lives in shambles, according to one ex-boyfriend. A terrifying portrait of Eliza surfaced as Blake put these revelations together. Her acts were motivated by a cold, calculating desire to own and control rather than by love or emotion. In her pursuit of approval, she had viewed Adam as a prize and a tool, and Veronica's suffering was only a byproduct. The findings of the research were unambiguous. The unfortunate result of the emotional abuse Veronica endured at the hands of her closest confidants was her death. The psychological effects on Veronica were indisputable, even though the affair itself was not illegal. The terrible results of their actions were highlighted in Detective Blake's report, which was a stinging indictment of Adam's frailty and Eliza's manipulative personality. Never again would Ridgewood be the same. Everyone who knew the Matthews and Harper families was affected for a long time by the scandal that shook the small community. Due to the condemnation of their acts, Adam and Eliza's reputations were permanently harmed. Ridgewood was plagued by Veronica's death for a long time. After being enchanted by the Harper Matthews' apparently ideal life, the town's citizens were suddenly forced to face the grim reality that lay under the surface. Ridgewood was left unable to handle the memories of his deceased wife and the betrayal that resulted in her passing, because Adam was so overcome with grief and remorse. Ignored and spurned, Eliza faded into the background. Although her departure was welcomed by many, the damage she wreaked persisted. Ridgewood would soon appear to be a tranquil place once more, but its residents were aware that secrets and intense feelings could still lead to conflict beneath the surface of their tiny community. Would either Adam or Veronica have been able to avoid disaster? Can someone like Eliza actually change? Or are some habits too deeply ingrained? How is Ridgewood going to recover from this disruption? We appreciate you viewing this further true crime tale.